Hello and welcome at Book Lovers Companion. My name is Edith and right next to me is my lovely co-host, the Chattering Teacup.
Hello.
And here with us, not from Ireland, but from the UK, Sheila Bugler. Hello Sheila and welcome at Book Lovers Companion.
Hello, thank you so much for hosting me tonight. I'm really, really excited to be here.
Yeah, we are excited that you are here and not at bloody Scotland. It's an honour.
I know. I'm one of the few who's not at bloody Scotland this weekend.
Because you were joining us. Thank you.
Exactly, I chose you.
Your latest book, Black Valley Farm, came out in June this year. It's a standalone compared to your other series. You have a series with D.I. Ellen Kelly, which has also been translated into German.
Yes, that's right, it has, yeah.
And you have another series with a former journalist, Dee Doran.
Yes.
And another standalone with a plane crash. But Black Valley Farm is the latest one, and it's an interesting book with a lot of topics in there.
Yeah, and it doesn't shine a very good or nice light on humans and society.
Yeah, to say it mildly. Sheila, tell us about this book of yours.
So the book is... So the main premise of the book is that 10 years ago, the bodies of 9 people were found in a remote farmhouse in Lincolnshire. Nobody knows who the people were, why they were living in the farmhouse, or why they were killed. That's the basic kind of central premise of the book.
Yep.
And the story is told from the perspective of, at the beginning, 2 main characters. The main character is a woman called Claire. All we know about Claire is that she is hiding from something. She is hiding her identity. She doesn't want anyone to know who she is. She doesn't want anyone to know about her past. So we see Claire's story. Alongside Claire's story, we see a podcaster like you guys called Nuala Fox. Nuala has written an award-winning true crime podcast about the killing of nine people at Black Valley Farm 10 years ago. And throughout the book, gradually Claire's story and Nuala's story come together, and gradually we learn what happened at the farm and how Claire was involved. And that's kind of basically it. And there are lots of themes in the book, as you've alluded to. There's lots of characters who are deeply unpleasant.
Oh, yes.
And partly that's because I just really like writing about nasty people because they're really interesting. And I think partly as a writer, you can't help sort of just exploring topics that interest you. So for me, there's a lot of themes around, I think, feminism, really. And there are 3 central characters in the book. There's Claire, there's Nuala, there's also a character called Andrea. And for me, really, the book is about how each of those 3 women, in their own way, deal with trauma very differently. They've all been through traumatic experiences and they all handle that trauma in a very different way.
In your book, you also describe a sort of cultish community, which is fun. I mean, it's not funny, but it was
unusual.
Yeah, unusual and a coincidence, because before I read your book, I have watched quite a few interviews with people who left cults. And you always get the same answers from them. Why? Some were born into the cults, some joined these cults, and it's a common theme in their lives. And it is also reflected in the characters in your books, the ones who joined this community. Where did you get the idea for this kind of community from?
So the starting point for the book was the idea of people living in this remote farmhouse. So I had to think, why were they there? Who was this community living far away from everywhere else that nobody knew about? And that was the starting point. And as I thought about the different reasons, the idea of some sort of cult-like community seemed to be the most obvious way to do it. Now, I don't want to give any spoilers, but one of the things I'm interested in writing about women who aren't always victims. So there are certain elements of the cult that are unlike what our perception of a cult is, I think, generally. Now, I was very mindful of kind of getting the experience of victims right. So I went down quite a rabbit hole, actually, of reading lots and lots of interviews with people who had escaped cults. And one of the things I didn't explore in the book, because I didn't feel educated enough to do, was I didn't write about the experiences of people who join a cult. I wrote very much from the experiences of people who were there not by choice, because they were born into it or their parents had taken them there. And the experiences of those people was based on a lot of interviews I read, particularly with an Australian cult called The Family, which is a very famous cult. Yes, I'm sure. Yeah. So I read a lot of interviews with the children who'd grown up in that cult and had managed to get away from it. So that informed some of the characters in the book, definitely. It's a really difficult thing to write about, and it's because it's not a pleasant subject.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. And it's the book touches a little bit on the fact that if people join such a cult or are forced to join at a very young age and they live remotely from the rest of society, they have sometimes problems understanding our society when they rejoin.
Of course, absolutely. There is a very famous book. I can't remember it. It's about it's about a young American woman. It's written it's written about her experiences of growing up in a sort of cultish type society in America. And there's an amazing scene in the book where she talks about, she gets away from the cult and she goes to university. And you might remember the name of the book. If I tell you about it, you might have heard of it. But she talks about being in class one day at university, and they're doing a lecture on a topic, and a word comes up that she's never heard of before. And she puts her hand up and she says to the lecturer, what's that word? I don't know what it means. And she's kind of ostracized in her class at university because she hasn't heard of the word before. And it turns out that the word is Holocaust. But because she grew up in this remote community, she didn't know the meaning of the word, this word that most of us we all know. And that really kind of resonated with me, that her absolute lack of knowledge of the real world,
This community or this community leader we learn about throughout the book. This use of religion on the one hand, and also the use of a certain kind of politics that also, for me, sometimes drifts in a cultish way.
Well, I think the use of religion, let's start with that. So first of all, I grew up in Ireland in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
And, so I'm very cynical, first of all, about kind of organized religion generally, because I grew up in a country that was really ruled by the church in many, many negative connotations. And I think one of the things that cults do a lot is that religion or a form of religion is used as a form of manipulation, really, to manipulate people and to sort of get them to believe they're entering something that's not really what it is. And then again, I think with the political element of the book, it's not a spoiler to say that one of the storylines in the book is about a far-right political party. And I think for me, that came from just really observing world politics today and what's happening in this country and wanting to explore that a little bit. And, particularly living in a country where we've been through Brexit and seeing... I live in Eastbourne in the south coast of England, which is very much a town of two halves. It's a town of very wealthy people and there's very deprived areas. And I remember really clearly speaking to people from the more deprived areas of Eastbourne, in the lead up to Brexit. And they basically just bought all the lies that people told them, because they felt completely disenfranchised and disempowered, and people manipulate that sense of powerlessness. Bad politicians manipulate that sense of powerlessness for their own gains. And that's something that I'm just interested in. I don't think I was making a statement writing about that, but it's a topic that interests me a lot. I think I hate how people are vilified sometimes. A lot of people in this country were vilified for voting for Brexit, but actually they shouldn't be vilified. The people who sold them lies are the people who should be vilified.
And there was also a scene in the book when there was a talk by this politician in front of a not so well-off area.
Yeah.
People from not well-off area. And the excitement before it in the room, and it catches everyone in the room. And if you're amongst such a group, you get excited too. It doesn't matter if you agree or not. It's just the feeling and the energy in the room.
Of course it is. And for people who have got very little in their lives, for somebody to come along and give them that sense of excitement, that sense of purpose, that's very, very powerful.
And it's someone talking to them instead of ignoring them. That's also important.
Exactly. Yeah.
What type of character does one have to be to become such a person?
Well, for me, and this is my very subjective opinion, I think a type of sociopath. And I really don't say that lightly. That's what I think. That's what I believe. I think it's somebody who only cares about their own progression and what they can get out of it, and doesn't care about manipulating people or damaging people or the damage that will do.
Also not a narcissist.
Exactly, yeah, or a narcissist, yes.
You said, when you talked about your book just now, you said it all began with a podcast. It was also my impression. We are not lying, my friends, dear listeners. We always tell the truth, well, most of the time. But our podcast host in this book, she also has a guilty conscience, doesn't she?
She does now. The thing about our podcast host is that I loved writing her, and I love her as a character. She's definitely flawed, and she has done bad, wrong things, but she's really aware of it as well. And she messes up before the book begins. She's messed up something really, really badly. And through the book, she has to learn that the only way to sort of make up for that is by admitting what she did. And, I really loved writing her. I loved her character. I loved her kind of tiger mom protectiveness of her son. I loved the fact that she is messed up and she does bad things, but that ultimately at her heart, she's a good person.
Yes, she is. And what I also found interesting about her character was, although she despises this politician, I mean, she gets the job offer, but she despises this politician. But the real eye-opener was a conversation she has with another journalist who has covered this politician or wrote about this politician before. And this conversation makes her think a bit more deeply about the character of this politician, not just her politics, but of her as a person. What's behind all this? There's more behind this than just a political agenda.
That's right. That's the first time she does think that, yes. And of course, with Nuala, the podcaster, the irony is that Nuala thinks that she is a woman of principle. She stood up to a boss. She does everything for her son, but she's a woman of principle who constantly compromises herself by making bad decisions.
Yeah.
And working with that politician is a particularly bad decision, as she eventually works out. And I don't think there's any spoilers by saying that.
No, of course not. I don't think so. But where did you find her? Where did you find her character?
She just jumped onto the page fully formed. That doesn't always happen, but it did with her 100%.
Okay.
She just jumped. And I really, really loved writing her. I really did. So she was so easy. She just kind of flowed out of me. I'm not sure what that says about me, but she did.
But isn't it utterly human to have ideals and be flawed?
Completely. And I just, I'm 55, and I just look around and I just think actually most of the interesting people I know have messed up and made mistakes, and they're, we're all human. We're all messed up. We're all complicated and complex, and it's what makes us interesting, But the thing is, of course, we have to learn. And when we mess up, we have to learn from that. And I think that's easier for some people than others.
True. But also admit to our flaws.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I mean, in her case, it's even more complicated because where is the line between honesty, lying through omission, and being an outright liar?
Is this for Nuala, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the thing is that's what she has to work out, isn't it? Because she doesn't know where that line is.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think, if I think about her, I think in her head, certainly at the beginning of the book, she starts out by thinking, it doesn't matter what I do once I am giving my son a safe home. Everything else is up for grabs. And she has to slowly learn that that's not enough.
Yeah, that's true. Is it also, would you agree? I mean, you said there are a lot of topics in this book. I mean, we have power, we have lots of secrets, we have guilt, lots of guilt. There isn't a character who doesn't feel guilt. Well, maybe one or two. But like you said, the villains, maybe they don't.
But they're
Family.
traumatized,
They're yeah,
coping
also
with it.
some, even the villains are.
So on that, actually, now I will say, I did write that book as I was coming out of a particularly traumatic time in my own life. And one of the things I realized about Claire, so Claire is very, very traumatized, the central character. And I didn't realize until the book was finished that actually I had been writing a book about trauma, and particularly Claire's trauma. It wasn't what I set out to do, but that's what it definitely did become, was the book about trauma. And I think and I always say, because I really believe that writing for me isn't about therapy, but in some sense, I think that book was a little bit.
Yeah, maybe. But the female, you said the male characters before also, that the male characters, well, not all of them, because
most of them
are
not very nice, let's say.
Yeah, the women are traumatized, but there is also, with the women, there's also good and there is bad. We do have a different point of view when we talk about women and being good and bad, don't we? We hold them to a higher standard.
Well, so there's a few things about that. First of all, society holds women to a higher standard, but also we hold ourselves to a higher standard. You know, I look around, for example, at all the mothers I know, and we hold ourselves to ridiculous standards that men just don't do. Like, we're ridiculous, you know, and we put this expectation on ourselves to be brilliant mothers, to be brilliant at our jobs, to be brilliant wives, to look good. I mean, it is utterly exhausting. I think it's exhausting. And one of the things I love about getting older as a woman is kind of just letting some of that stuff go, you know, and just not caring so much. But I look at younger women coming up behind me and they're still doing it. They're still, you know, carrying the burden of being a working mother. That it's really tough. Being a woman is really tough. And then for the younger generation who have all of the ongoing influence of social media, telling them how to look and what to eat, not 24 hours a day, that's even harder.
Yeah.
So I'm going to keep talking for a minute.
Yeah.
So on that, I think the point you made, Edith, or we're starting to make, was, you know, that the women are possibly, a lot of the women are more three-dimensional in some ways than the men in the book, apart from Leo, I think, possibly, who it's got a very sort of quite, I think, a rounded story.
Yep.
But really, honestly, that's because I just love writing about women. I'm interested in women and women's experiences. And actually, there just wasn't room in that book to write about lots of men as well.
You said so that Leo is a different kind of person, but Leo, we learn about Leo when he was a boy. So it might be easier to give him more than just a one-dimensional personality. Because he's not the villain, he's also just like the women, a person who has been traumatized by his experience.
Exactly. And I want, you know, there had to be space for Leo because, you know, he's really a key part of the story.
Yeah, exactly. This turn of events at the end, again, I have to say, I wouldn't make it as a detective. I'm useless. Because I fell into the trap. Yes, well done. It was a good turnaround, and I thought, oh, goodness me, when we learn about what really happened. And may I say that I got the impression that everything that was going on with this community, it reminded me a little bit of Handmaid's Tale. And I don't know if you heard of this organization they had during the Third Reich, Lebensborn. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
No. It was a sort of breeding program.
Okay.
By the SS. And it reminded me a little bit of that because they used blonde, blue-eyed women for the SS to produce blonde, blue-eyed children.
Okay, gosh, how horrific is that?
Yeah, they sometimes kidnapped children from the eastern parts of Europe which they conquered, and they also, kidnapped women and put them in their homes. They are called Lebensborn, and they had the point was to produce children with SS soldiers, officers,
special
and so on.
features.
Yes, with special features.
Genetics
Well, I
doesn't work
didn't
that
know
way.
about that, but of course, in the book, I guess there is a reason why specific women are in the farm.
Yeah.
But and also, I guess it just shows that, I mean, over time, women have been used for that way,
Yeah.
which is awful.
And the sad thing is, they actually wanted a better life.
Say that again.
They actually wanted a better life when they
No, of
agreed to
course,
go
that's
there.
it. That's it. Yeah.
And they're exploited
actually,
again.
that's a classic. It's a classic manipulation technique, isn't it? To promise somebody an escape from something terrible and to promise them something better. Because all of those women moved there believing that they were moving to somewhere good.
Better life, safer life, also for their children to change something. And look where they ended up, and how this whole trauma started for them. And years later, they still haven't coped. I mean, Claire.
And a lot of them feel guilt.
Yeah, Claire feels guilt until the end of the book. Right to the end.
Claire has, I think, really kind of typical survivor's guilt in a way.
Yeah, and extremely. I mean, even at the end of the book, she still hasn't coped with anything. She still feels as if she has to reveal her secrets.
Well, I think I didn't want to tie it up too neatly for Claire, because you don't just get over a trauma like that. I think if it had been, if initially there was a very different ending, but actually at the last minute I wrote that final chapter, and that just felt like a much better way for the book to end.
I know what you mean, saying that someone who has experienced such horrors has lived with the guilt all those years, and such a person can't overcome it without help.
You can't turn it off
with just like that.
No. I mean, I do think the ending for her is hopeful, but it couldn't be just all twee and lovely, and here we are happily ever after. I think there had to be more nuance to it, I think, than that.
But also in this way, it makes you think for a longer time, because if the book everything is tied up neatly, it's nice and you let it go more easily than if it's not, because it makes you think more.
Yeah, well, I hope so. I really, that last chapter, I really wrote it from the heart. Really wrote it from the heart in kind of one draft, and it just felt right. I've realised the more books I write that I can't write the last chapter of a book until I'm on the very last draft of the book, just before it's about due to go to my publisher, because it's only then that I really understand how it should end.
Were you tempted to set the book in Ireland?
Now, the reason I say now is I haven't yet written a book set in Ireland, but I'm just finishing a book that's coming out next year that is set in Ireland. And the reason I didn't set Black Valley Farm in Ireland was England, Britain, it's just a bigger country. So there was better scope to have to choose a really remote location, because Ireland's very small. So I just couldn't, of course, there are lots of remote places in Ireland, but it made sense to put it in a bigger country where there's more space,
And your other series, maybe also learn a little bit about your other books as well. Like I said before, the D.I. Ellen Kelly series has also been translated into German. What can you tell us about this other series of yours?
Okay, so my first series of books features a second generation Irish woman called Ellen Kelly. She's a detective in South London. She's recently widowed when the series begins, and she's got 2 young children. And one of the reasons she's widowed, it's kind of a device, really. At the time, I had 2 young children, and I wanted to write about what it's really like to be a working mother, having to juggle the responsibilities of parenthood and a job and feeling like you're not doing any of them right. So Ellen, I loved writing Ellen. She's quite a different character to me. She's very morally black and white. So she's very unambiguous in what's right and what's wrong. She believes that criminals are wrong. She believes in justice when she believes in a tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye. Very different to me. She also believes in the death penalty, which I absolutely don't. And I used to get a lot of emails from people saying, "Oh, wow, it's lovely to meet a writer," because people think that I have the same views as my characters. But she's a great character. I loved writing her. And then I have another series featuring a middle-aged, well, I say middle-aged, in her 50s, investigative journalist called Dee Doran. That's based in Eastbourne, where I live. And at the start of the series, Dee is really in a bad place. She has been fired from a career as a really successful journalist in London. Both her parents are recently dead. Her marriage with an alcoholic husband has recently broke up, and she's sort of really in a lost place. But through the series, she kind of finds redemption and turns her life around. And I loved writing her. I found writing a police procedural, which is my first series, I found writing that quite difficult because not difficult, but you have to do a lot of research for procedurals. You have to get all of the police procedural stuff right, which is basically why my second series had a journalist, not a police detective, because I didn't have to be so rigorous in my research because I'm lazy, right?
And you have more freedom with her.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah. But I must say, I loved writing both my series. I'm not 100% sure. A lot of people have asked for more of each of the books in the series. But I think I prefer writing standalones because there's much more scope. Each story that you move on to, you can have completely new characters. There's much more freedom, I think, in writing standalones. But it is harder when you write crime fiction because publishers and a lot of readers want a series. So,
yeah, I can understand it. May I also ask you which you prefer to write, or maybe you prefer both, or you haven't decided yet which you do like best, first or third person narration? Because in Black Valley Farm, you change this kind of narration.
Yeah. Black Valley Farm is the first book I've written with first-person narrator. And I'm trying to think, in the one I'm writing now set in Ireland, there's minimal first-person narration in the prologue and the epilogue, but that's it. I honestly don't have a preference. I think you choose it based on what feels right for the story. So Claire, the character in Black Valley Farm, she's written from a first-person perspective, but in earlier drafts of the book, that was third person. But writing in the first person for Claire just maybe made me feel closer to her, deeper inside. I'm not really sure why. It just felt right for her character, but not really for a technical reason that I can explain. It just felt right. I think you have to go with what feels, because also Black Valley Farm's the first book where I've got any present tense sections. I haven't done that before, but I have done it again in my novel that I'm just finishing now. And that's something that feels very immediate and which I've liked, actually.
More action. It feels as if you are in at the moment within the action, part of the action as a reader.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. Definitely with the first person narration. And I'm not sure, but I'm wondering if with first person narration for me, it seems to make it feel pacier, I think.
Yeah. Also for the reader.
Maybe, yeah.
Because you also read the parts of the story from Nula's point of view, but it's not first person.
Yeah, that's what you got confused with.
Yeah.
And she always asked me, isn't that first person? I said, no,
it's
come
her
on.
Point of view, but
it's her point of view, but it's a third person. But
yes,
you get
confusing.
The feeling.
So point of, and now I think so. Point of view is writing from a character's perspective. That can be first person or third person.
Yeah.
But you can do both. It's point of view is quite it's quite a thing that I had to learn at the beginning when I was writing, actually, because when I started writing, I wrote my books like I was watching a TV series. So I had to learn about point of view and learn to kind of, and how my husband described it to me was you have to kind of be inside the character's head looking out, and you write from that perspective.
Yeah, but for you as a writer, it's always completely clear which point of view you have. Maybe not for the reader.
But that's why you have to.
Yeah,
That's
I
why you
know.
have to make sure, as the writer, you're in. You know, you're doing it that way, inside the character's
Yeah.
head, looking out. Because otherwise, it's confusing. And I
Yeah.
find reading, I can see when I read books where the writer isn't clear about point of view, and it is confusing. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. But for the writers, it's absolutely clear.
It's like when I'm talking, I know what I'm talking about.
Exactly.
Maybe the other person
Yes,
doesn't know what I'm
exactly.
talking about.
Yeah, but you know perfectly well what you're talking about. So why can't you follow Teacup?
The other way around.
Yeah. Or something like that. And what about your writing process? It's always an interesting question to ask authors how they do it. Planning,
That's my
pantsing.
favorite thing to talk about too, because it's so interesting. And the reason it's so interesting is because we're all so different as writers. It's amazing. So right, my process is the more difficult one, which is the unplanned write and see what happens process. So I'm very good friends with a writer called Marion Todd. Marion Todd plans her books like you wouldn't believe. She has a spreadsheet. She has like her books. She literally has, before she starts a novel, she has a spreadsheet and she has PowerPoint slides with the whole story plotted out. And it's a really effective way to write because you've got it all plotted first and then you can just sit down and write. My process, let me tell you, is I have an idea, I start writing. I write about 30,000 words, it's rubbish. So I start again. I write about 30,000 words, it's rubbish. I start again, I might get to 40,000 words. It's unbelievably painful and time consuming. And I have tried really, really hard to do it the other way, but I just can't. It doesn't work for me. It doesn't work. So the book I'm working on now that is coming out next year, that was 12 drafts of pain. 12 drafts of pain to get to where it's got to now. Black Valley Farm was 8, I think. That's before it goes to the publisher and goes through all the edits.
It's a lot.
It is a lot, isn't it? But it's the only way I can do it, you know. And I've kind of accepted now because I spent a long time trying to do it the other way. And actually, I just lost a lot of the pleasure in writing. And I've realised now I need to go back to just letting it go and going with it and seeing where it takes me.
Do you even put that much work in the first draft when you know it's not going to be good?
Do you know what? This is the worst thing. Yes, I do. I'm an eternal optimist. It's insane. It's ridiculous. There is a part of me that somehow still thinks this is going to be great this time. And that's because there is something magical about creating the story, right? So every time you do get caught up in the magic and you have to keep going while the magic is happening, but it stops. It always stops. And then there's a little piece of you that doesn't believe it stopped. So you push it a bit further, but it's too late then. But in a way, each draft, you know, you're getting closer to something that's eventually going to be the end. And, you know, I would say Stephen King and Harlan Coben both have my process. So it works. It does work. You get there eventually.
But you stick to the same idea from the first to the last chapter.
There's always a central idea. So, and sometimes it's just an image. So with Black Valley Farm, that was it was good in a way. That's quite a strong idea to work with, you know, 9 bodies discovered in a remote farmhouse. But the book I'm writing set in Ireland, I had an image for that. And the image was a beautiful 5-star hotel in Dublin, a group of beautiful people sitting in a conservatory, you know, just looking beautiful. That was the image in my head. And then the whole book was about who are these people? What are they doing in the hotel? What's their story? And that became something that is now a very, very different book. But that was the central image. That's all I had to go with.
I can understand that you say, okay, I write a draft and I write another draft. But you said the police procedure is something very different because you do need some sort of, I don't know, points which you can follow. Because like you said, a police procedure is a different cup of tea.
Well, so what's different about it is you have to get the police research bit right. But you see, you're still telling a story. So the story, with for police procedural, I think, certainly for me, you have to get the story first. Once you've got the story down, all of the technical policey bits you can, work out later. So when I started writing the Ellen Kelly books, I was too nervous because it was my first book, right? I was too nervous to ask any police people for help. Because I didn't want them to think I was just too shy to tell people I was writing a book. Yeah. So I sent an email to my local police station in London because I thought an email is okay. I sent an email to their press office, I think. And I started like really polite saying, I'm writing this book and I've got these questions. Would anyone be able to help me? And I heard nothing for ages. And I thought, oh my God, they just think I'm this stupid person asking these really stupid questions. And then about 9 months later, I got this email reply back from the police station, and it was just so sweet. I got this absolutely massive email trail. My email had been sent to different people all throughout the police station who'd all added comments and all replied. So I got this massive, massive, massive big load of emails, which was really lovely.
You wouldn't believe it, would you?
Copy of the book.
Yeah, you wouldn't believe it, would you? How much they like to talk about their job.
Well, that's the thing I know now. So now I have no problem asking anyone. And people do love to talk about their job. With The Lucky Eight, which is my book about the plane crash, oh my God, and it was amazing. I found this guy who was some kind of aviation specialist. And he was amazing because not only did he just like tell me how stupid loads of the stuff I was proposing was, he also got really involved in trying to come up with kind of ways to make it happen. And it was lovely. And you just think, and this is the great thing. There's so many people, like me doing this podcast is such a joy because I'm talking about the thing I love doing, right?
Yeah.
And you're right. People love talking about the things they're passionate about.
I always suspect that people talk about their job or whatever they experience during the day to the people around them all the time, and they're not so interested anymore. So if you find someone who really is interested in what you're talking about, you're so excited.
No. Well, do you know what? The other thing is nobody in my family cares a jot about me and my writing, which I love. But if I sat down at dinner every night and started talking about my writing process, my family would laugh at me and tell me to shut up. So, I need it. You guys are my outlet for talking about my writing process. Thank you.
You're welcome. And we love to listen, to hear about your writing process. Because, like you said, everyone is different. Some people go with the flow, just like you. Yeah. Some, like you mentioned, Marion Todd, they keep on planning, which I find...
it sounds like a storyboard.
Yeah, exactly. Completely.
Yeah,
and the others are somewhere in the middle. Yeah, I mean, if that's what she needs and what helps her to get the story told, perfect.
And the other thing about it is there's not one correct way.
Exactly.
Whatever works for you, it's fine.
And I think it's having the confidence to know what works for you. That's the really important thing.
Yeah, exactly.
As you find it out after a few failures.
And, writing, like all things that are worth doing, writing involves a lot of failing. You're trying stuff all the time. And anything creative, it's about getting stuff wrong and learning from that. And it's one of the reasons I love writing, because I do yoga and I'm really bad at yoga, but I love it because I know I will never get bored with yoga because there's so much to learn. And I kind of feel like that about writing. I'll never be as good as I want to be. So you're never going to get bored with it. You keep going, keep trying new stuff.
Exactly. You can always learn something new. And for us readers, we can always read something new.
Yeah.
What also my question is for you, to date, it is Agatha Christie's birthday. What is it about crime fiction that keeps us so interested in? Why does it never get boring?
Well, there are a few reasons, I think. First of all, I think that crime fiction is such a small name for such a massive genre. So it's so huge, the genre of crime fiction. So, for example, I'm a huge fan of an American writer called Megan Abbott. I'm also a fan of American writers like Dashiell Hammett, for example. You could not find two more different styles, two more different types of books. I love cozy crime fiction. It's so broad, the genre. You've got everything from cozy crime to domestic noir to, noir books to thrillers. So I think that's one thing, that when we say, why is crime fiction so popular? It's because it's so broad. There's so many different types of crime fiction. And also, it's just a lovely way, isn't it, of exploring our fears in a safe environment. You read a book that scares you, and you can experience being scared. You can experience terror and fear and danger, but in a really safe environment. You're safe because nothing bad's going to happen. And also, generally with crime fiction, you kind of know that the bad guys will get their comeuppance, and that's quite satisfying, isn't it?
True. But did you listen to some true crime podcast for Black Valley Farm?
Yes, I did. Not particularly, not specifically for Black Valley Farm, but I had listened to. I love good true crime podcasts. I love them. And one of the things I did do, because I became really, I did a lot of research on the ethics of doing a true crime podcast, because the ones I've listened to that are really good, I thought a lot about, how do you do a true crime podcast and it not be really manipulative and not be taking advantage of other people's pain? And there are a lot of ethics about it, actually. There's kind of a code, which I do refer to in the book. There is quite a strong moral code that people who do good true crime podcasts really do follow, which is about, not being manipulative and about being truthful, and lots of things that Nuala wasn't very good at, actually.
Yeah.
But she was successful.
Yeah, yes. Indeed.
And she did it for the success, I guess, not for the truth, the story.
Well, you see, and she started out wanting the truth, and then she got compromised. But another thing I did was I did loads of research into journalists who've lied. And there's loads of stories out there. There's loads of kind of quite famous stories about journalists who have told really big fat lies in stories and stuff, and sometimes got away with it for a long time and then been caught out. So that was very entertaining to read up about all of that.
Is it because they repeated the lie again and again until it is believed, or?
Well, I think yes. I think once you've lied publicly, you can't really take that back, can you? That's a very hard thing to do.
Yeah, when it's out there.
Yeah, so there's stories of, journalists who claimed they had been war heroes and stuff, and they'd written about their experiences. And if you take that back, if you hold your hand up and say, I've lied, that's your career ruined, isn't it?
Yeah, you're done, especially with journalists.
Have you guys read Yellowface?
No, not yet. No.
Oh, you must read Yellowface. It's a really good book that came out earlier this year.
I heard about it.
Yeah, me too.
So it is a crime novel, but really, it's more of a kind of culture commentary on kind of all sorts of stuff. Anyway, that I thought of Yellowface because that's about somebody who does something very dishonest, and then the whole novel is about her trying to get away with it. It's really good. I'd really recommend it. It's good fun.
Doing something horrible, trying to get away. How far does one go to get away with it?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? How far do you go? And what would you do to protect your reputation? And part of that book is about she becomes more and more famous. So, of course, the more famous she becomes, the more she doesn't want to lose that fame.
Because there's a lot of money in it as well, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah, but you have to be careful, because when you lie, you have to have a good memory.
Because one lie usually leads to another one. And then
I heard an interview recently with an actor called Chris O'Dowd. I'm completely going off in a tangent here, but this is quite a good story. He's an Irish actor in America. He was in the film Bridesmaids. I don't know if you've seen that, but he said that when he was starting out in America, he used to go to go to auditions for jobs, but you'd be one of so many people. So he'd always invent this story at the beginning of an audition that he'd been attacked by a dog. And so he'd go and say, oh my God, I've just been attacked by this dog downstairs, but bit my leg. And he went into an audition one day and he told this whole story about being attacked by a dog. And the guy said to him, oh, you're so unlucky. This is the second time you came into this building and got attacked by a dog.
Oops.
Oops, indeed. So that's, yes, if you're going to lie, you need to remember what lies you've told.
But he was remembered, on the other hand.
Yes, but he didn't remember, unfortunately. It was the other people who remembered.
No, that's bad luck in this case for him. Absolutely. Sheila, what would be your advice now after having written so many books to any other author out there?
I think a few bits of advice. The first thing is that you just have to write and keep writing. I would say one piece of advice I always give is I see a lot of aspiring writers who do endless creative writing courses. And while it's good to do a creative writing course, I think that lots of people do lots of creative writing courses because it avoids sitting down to write a book. And actually, sooner or later, you have to sit down and you have to write. And what you have to do when you start writing is you have to keep writing. And it's really difficult and it's very lonely. But so what I would say, and what really helped me, was setting a daily word count at the beginning. So sitting down and saying, right, today I'm going to write 500 words. And you do that and you stick to that, because if you've written 500 words a day over a week, you can see the progress you're making, which is really good. And just keep going till you get to the end of your first draft. It's not going to be perfect, but don't do, like I said earlier, that I keep going back and I stop at about 30,000 words, but I didn't do that at the beginning. At the beginning, you need to keep going till the end, until you have a first draft and you've got a first draft of something that you can then work on. And that's way better than having a first draft of nothing.
And then chuck it into the bin.
Well, you don't chuck it in the bin, but you go and you rewrite it and you rewrite it.
Yeah, exactly.
And most of writing is rewriting.
Yeah. But when do you stop the rewriting? I mean, you have this draft and you said you rewrite, but at some point you also have to stop the rewriting, don't you?
That is such a good point. Yes, you do. So in a way, there's the type of aspiring writer who does endless creative writing courses to never have to write. Now, I have many good friends over the years who have never been able to stop rewriting. And actually, you have to stop eventually. You have to start sending your book out to people.
Yeah.
Every book I've written, I could keep rewriting it to death, but then I wouldn't be a published author. You have to. And it is really hard to know when is good enough. And that's why I think, especially before you have an agent or before you have a publisher, you need to have a few trusted people around you who can tell you when it's ready, when it's time to go now. It's time to let your baby go out into the world.
Yeah, and risk being, getting bad reviews. I mean, who doesn't get them?
Well, there's a lot of rejection, especially in the early stages. Yeah. But every rejection will, good agents who have time might tell you things that they think could be improved.
Yeah.
And on you go from there. Also, and this is worth saying, my first 2 novels never got published because nobody wanted them, So I had to write a 3rd one. And luckily somebody wanted that one.
Yeah, I mean, why not? Of course. Today with Amazon and other platforms, it's easier to put out your book. But what about the quality? I mean, it's easier. People can get them out, which is good, of course. But what about the quality of those books? Do we have to worry about the quality of those books?
So there are loads of self-published authors who are doing a brilliant job, who do it properly. They get, they have editors, they have people who professionally design their covers, and they do a fantastic job. But there are also people who just put their books out there, and in a way, good on them if that's what they want to do. But as a reader, if you're paying money for a book, you are right to expect a certain amount of quality, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would never say to somebody, don't self-publish, because it's huge now. And, loads of people are making lots of money self-publishing really good books. But I would say if you're going to self-publish, get into the self-publishing community and work out the right way to do it so your book has the best chance of being really good.
And how worried do we have to be about AI? Because there was this, I think this week, there was this article about Amazon and sort of fake books where artificial intelligence was used to publish books and with under different names and so on. And the books weren't real and they got into trouble already with this kind of, output.
Yeah, I mean, there's another crime writer whose name escapes me at the moment who came out a few weeks ago and said that he used AI to help write his latest novel. Not to help write it, but in terms of kind of, I think he used AI for research and stuff. So part of me thinks, well, I mean, for all of us, it's not something we can avoid, right? AI is here and it's going to stay with us. In the short term, I don't think any AI books have been written that are of any good kind of literary merit. So I don't think we have to worry too much. And I think longer term, we have to find ways to work with AI that improves all of our lives rather than makes it worse, you know? And that's going to be a huge challenge, isn't it? It must be like, you know, I mean, it's an exciting challenge if we can get it right, because think of all the amazing things AI is going to be able to do in the world of science and medicine. It's going to be amazing and save lives, but it needs to be managed so carefully, I guess. I mean, I don't want to be out of a job because of AI. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, me neither. Yeah, absolutely. We have to learn to deal with it.
I mean,
yes,
it probably depends on the politicians setting the rules, setting the framework. And that's what the companies are asking for, actually.
Yeah. And I think the danger is that, you know, the politicians will never be as educated about AI as the people developing the AI, you know.
Sometimes
that's often the case.
Yeah, sometimes you have to wonder what politicians are educated in. But anyway, that's another topic for another podcast.
It's another podcast.
Indeed. Sheila, can you elaborate a little bit more on your plans? You've mentioned them a few times now, but what can we look forward to?
So my new book is called Dark Road Home, and it's set in Ireland. So I'm very nervous about that because it's the first book I've written set in Ireland. It's really, really, really different to Black Valley Farm. It's about the basic premise of the story. It's about a woman called Leah Ryan who returns home to Ireland after an absence of 18 years. She comes home and she, through a series of different events, is forced to face up to the circumstances of why she left Ireland 18 years ago and never came back. And it's much more, it's different. It's different to Black Valley Farm. It's about a kind of central theme of the book is about quite a toxic friendship between two women, two young girls.
Okay, the past. Again.
Now, that's the thing. I am a bit sort of, you know, my books, there's always a bit of the past coming into the present because I'm so interested in, you know, we're all the people we are today because of the things that have happened to us. And I love that. I find that so interesting.
And setting it in Ireland, I mean, you mentioned it before. There's a lot of past there.
Well, so much. And of course, for her to have been away from it for 18 years, you know, she's coming back to an Ireland where, you know, we have divorce that wasn't there when she left. We have gay marriage that wasn't there when she left. We have abortion that wasn't there when she left. So she's coming back to a very different country.
A very modern Ireland, even compared to Austria. Ireland. But which country isn't modern compared to Austria? Anyway.
England these days, probably.
Even England these days sometimes. In some aspects, at least. Yeah.
Maybe.
Depends on what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Sheila, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know?
No, I would just like your listeners to thank them very much for listening to me going on for so long, and to thank both of you so much for hosting me. It's a real honour, honestly, and a real pleasure. So thank you very much.
The honour was ours, and thank you for making time for us and be so accommodating.
Thank you both. Thank you.
You did enjoy this episode as much as we did? Then hit subscribe and don't miss the next episode. Also, make sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. If you like to support us and buy us a coffee, you can do so via Buy Me a Coffee and other platforms. You can find all the necessary links in the description. Until next time.